What's going on, everyone? So I got an exciting breakdown for you all today. We had a pretty big tournament in UK over the weekend, and we're going to be breaking down all of these stats here that Limitless has provided for us. I absolutely love these breakdowns because they do such an amazing job of actually giving us the entire metagame, the win percentages, the actual deck lists of the top 8 and everything. So it's going to be a really smooth video diving into everything with this Manchester UK tournament that happened over the weekend. And might I say, there are some pretty big surprises, two in particular deck lists that are really interesting to me, and one that I would have never expected to be in top 8. Might just be a little bit of one of those situations where like you have a CAD red in the top 8 because people aren't ready to play against it, don't have sideboards for it, etc. But we're going to dive into what that deck list is a little bit later on. First, though, we got to start off with how many people were in this tournament. So if we pull up the standings here and we scroll all the way down, we could see that there were a total of 170 different players in this tournament. My head's blocking a little bit, but you can see 170 here at the bottom, which was a massive amount of players. Now, in terms of what the metagame shaped up to be, this is where things get a little bit interesting. We had 30 players diving in with Sabine Wren. Now, not all of these were Sabine Green, but Sabine Wren was the leader of choice. And you can see if we just pull up the cards used, you can see there is a small portion of people that were running Sabine Yellow, but the majority were running Sabine Green. Next up was Boba Fett, and you can see the win percentages for all these decks off to the side. Sabine Wren with a very convincing 55% or almost 55% win rate. Boba Fett next up here, and you can see again, most of these were Boba Yellow. A vast majority of these were Boba Yellow. There was a small amount running Boba Green, right, with the Echo Base, Maz Kanata's Castle, Energy Conversion Lab, and an even more small percentage of them running Boba Red or Boba Blue. Vast majority was the Boba Yellow that we've grown so used to. And again, you could see this win percentage for, again, majority Boba Yellow is immense. It is a 58% win percentage, which is incredibly high. And again, this just keeps popping up, Boba Yellow in particular, as one of the strongest decks of the entire format because of the matchups that it has against all these various different other meta decks being so powerful that even though it might not be the most popular, it does seem to have consistent, amazing results. Same thing goes with Sabine Green, even though her win percentage is a decent chunk lower. Both these decks just remain at the top. The follow-up to that one was Han Solo, the new Han, that is, at the third most played deck leader of the entire tournament. And you can see here, this is quite interesting because we have a pretty crazy split of where Han Solo is. We actually have about 75% of the Han decks playing Han Blue, which is probably the most obvious one. And there's also 25% of players playing the ECL Han version. Now, I've talked a lot about ECL Han and kind of where it situates itself. Now, this version steered a little bit towards the more ramp heavy or like getting into the like mid to late game with it. But there are a lot of different versions you can build with new Han Green. But it was really impressed to see that it pulls actually an even higher win rate than Sabine here with 19 decks played. The other two here outside of the top 3, Kira and Bossk. It was a little bit surprising. Kira coming down with a 45% win rate. This could just be a little bit of a fluke in terms of sometimes your decks just don't perform, but overall 18 players is a pretty solid sample size, and you can see most of them were running the Kira Green that we've come to kind of love. Lots of Kira Green, but there was also a small portion of players playing double blue Kira and even Kira Red. I don't think these are nearly as strong, so that might be a portion as to why the players kind of struggled a little bit. I dove into some of the matches, and it did look like the outside of Kira Green players were performing on average a decent chunk worse than the Kira Green players. But this just could be a little bit of an outlier in the overall grand scheme of Kira. After that, Bossk. So out of the top 5, Kira and Bossk, I would probably have expected something like Han, like old Han, to be up here, but not quite as many people playing it. I also would have potentially expected something along the lines of maybe some more mid-rangey style of decks, not related to Bossk. As Bossk, while he is strong, I have not seen him really be as the most oppressive version of the mid-range strategy. But Bossk Green, that is, at least in my opinion, the strongest variant, and it looks like most people agree with me, as that's what we're seeing most often when we see Bossk come up. And there are some strong things you could do with Bossk, don't get me wrong. You could be ramping up to, and you've seen this in some of my videos, 8-9 resources by the time you flip Bossk, which is really, really crazy. And it's not insanely difficult to do. Like, it's not like a magical unicorn land where in some decks it is. Just the fact that you can get him down, double ramp with things like, well, Price on your head, and ramp up with Super Laser Technicians, and ramp up with, heck, even a Price on your head on turn 1 is very, very, very strong. So pretty interesting to see that we were seeing a lot of Bossk Green, which I would not have expected. But realistically, the standouts were the top 3. Alongside one other that I wanted to mention, as we dive deeper into the meta game, you could see like Gar Saxon, 17% win rate, right? It's not really like all that crazy to see, as these sample sizes are really low. There was only 5 people playing Gar Saxon, or like you had a 50% win rate with Leia Organa. That was just one player playing it, right? And they didn't even go through the entirety of the tournament. So that doesn't really matter to me. But there was another deck that did have a decent amount of people playing it, in 9 players playing the Emperor Palpatine, and had a 57% win rate. Now, this was kind of interesting to see as well, because one of the lists that actually really performed well was not double green Palpatine, which is oftentimes the strongest variant. Instead, it was Palpatine Blue, which is more of like a soft control / teetering on hard control variants of, control and deck archetype. Realistically, it was the vast majority of players playing Palpatine Green, and it actually performed quite well. But this is where we dive into the day 2 top cut, because of course we have a lot of people playing Sabine, a lot of people Boba, a lot of people with New Han, but what actually performed in the tournament? And that's where we dive into this day 2 top cut. And you could see we had 3 Boba Fett's. There are variations of this Boba Fett, by the way. 2 Emperor Palpatines, again, variations on Emperor Palpatine, a Rey, and if we just pop back over to the metagame, you can see there were 7 Rey players, and basically all of them were playing, well, I should say basically all of them, a good amount of them were playing the Rey Red deck that we've grown so used to. But this one in the top 8 was actually not the Rey Red deck, and we'll get to that in just a moment, which is the surprising one to me. New Han and Sabine Wren. So Boba Fett clearly dominating yet again another tournament. And I think Boba Fett Yellow has consistently solidified itself as by far number 1 or number 2 in the entirety of Star Wars Unlimited. Like, it's hard to argue against it. You could argue that Sabine Wren is also up there because of how many top spots that Sabine Green has consistently taken. It's almost always shown up in a top 8. But Boba Yellow, just absolutely amazing. Now we're going to dive into all the deck lists today, as we have all the top 8s. And we're going to start off with the winner of the tournament. And mind you, here's the standings. Joshua here with an 11-0 record. It's not that he just won the tournament, but he crushed it. Like, absolutely just decimated the entire tournament. It was crazy. Every single other player, well, of course, if you're not winning, then you're going to have some sort of loss, right? But every other player, couple of losses, 2 to 3 losses. This guy, 0 losses, 0 match losses in the entirety of the tournament. And it wasn't even Boba Yellow. It was this Boba Green list. And mind you, even further than that, it's not even a Boba ECL list. It's just a standard green base. Now, this might be an adaptation, which we'll talk to about in just a moment, against the Boba Yellows and Sabine Greens that are looking to end the game quickly. But Overall, this is what I would expect out of a Boba Green list. I've talked about Boba Green. I've played a good amount of Boba Green. This goes in a little bit of a different direction than I have built my Boba Green, and there's some really interesting tech here that I want to talk about. First off, we have a pretty standard curve. We have a lot of one drops. These are really nice in Boba Green because there's going to be a lot more controlling aspects to the deck where you're trying to actually trade with your opponent's units because you're trying to get to the mid game. So having these one resource plays to follow up after you've traded with something and get that resource back can be really valuable. And there's just a lot of disruption in the earlier stages of the game. We have Cloud Riders, Bazine Natal attacking our opponent's hand, attacking our opponent's board, into a little bit of ramp that we're used to, Super Laser Technician resupplies, and just solid units across the curve. One card that has shown up that I honestly have been really unimpressed with is Cobb Vanth here in the early stages of the game. This can pull things like Cloud Rider, V-Wing, Bazine Natal, Salacious Crown Greedo after it's died. I'd be curious, because I had not watched this live, to see how well Cobb Vanth performed, but he's playing the full 3-of, and there's a lot of 2-ofs in this deck that, well, you might be surprised to see Cobb Vanth being the full 3-of. It also might be a reason as to why they're playing V-Wing in the main deck, although there, again, is some side tech in the sideboard where V-Wing becomes just like really funny to see in the deck. But you really want those 2 costs or less cards to hit off Cobb Vanth, and to be honest, if you're not playing the V-Wing, you're a little bit light on cards to hit. One other thing to note with this list is you have a good concentration of early villainy cards that you could pick up. And this is really important because if you plan on playing the full 3-of Darth Vader, you really do need to make sure that you have Super Laser Technicians, 7 Fleet Defenders, Boba Fett's to be able to hit off of Darth Vader, because you want to be able to get that value off of him. If not, then, well, you're kind of negating a lot of the strength of Darth Vader. So you really want to be able to hit. Now, here's where the deck gets kind of powerful, right? Yes, you're playing these early game units. Yes, you've got your Boba Fett's, your Super Laser Technician, whatever, to trade off in the early game, disrupt your opponent. But then we kind of skip a lot of the curve, right? We have no 4 resource plays, and we have only Bossk as the 5 resource play. And this one's a little bit interesting to me because they're not like fully in on leveraging Bossk necessarily. It's just that this is the aggro or a option of choice, and I think mainly because of the 5 toughness. When you look at the size up, and this is something that I've noticed when I was playing Boba Fett Cream, you're ramping in the early turns. Like you go turn 2 Super Laser Technician, that means you're playing Bossk on the following turn, and your opponent's probably playing a 4 resource play. 4 resource plays oftentimes have 4 power, and something like a Syndicate Lackeys, which is oftentimes in Bossk's spot, dies or trades with the 4 power units. Bossk gets to stick around and is still your ambusher that you want. And so I think mainly that's where I've seen Bossk be strong. And that's why Bossk ends up being played in the full 3-of here in the main deck. But again, only Bossk is a 5-drop. And it makes sense because, you ramp, get to 3 resources, you skip your 4th resource with resupply or Super Laser Technician, you're immediately in Bossk resources, then Fett's Fire Spray comes down, and then your 7 drops come down. And this is where the true strength of the deck lies. We have 6 7 resource plays here in the deck, the full 3-of Darth Vader and the full 3-of Maul. Maul specifically is a really nice game ender, and Darth Vader is a really nice board stabilizer, right? You drop Darth Vader, you get a couple different units, or you get another unit, and this allows you to kind of recur your, I guess, lack of board presence here in the middle stage of the game. Not just that, but also Boba Fett leader himself helps since he comes down early and such a high toughness unit. But Maul is the game ender. And it's really nice to have Maul with a lot of these underworld units, especially with things like, let's say, Fett's Fire Spray, Bossk, Bazine Natal, even Cloud Rider, Greedo, because you could actually just move the damage over to one of these less useful units and then have Maul stick around. The card that I'm most surprised to see in this list, because all these cards I played in my list for the most part, with the exception of, again, Cobb Vanth and V-Wing that I mentioned earlier, was Hotshot Blaster. Now, I tried Hotshot Blaster in my Boba Green list. Now, I played Energy Conversion Lab, and that's what you commonly see. So this non-Energy Conversion Lab version is kind of focused in on ramping explicitly and having natural ambushers, and then just getting your 7 resource plays down, which don't, well, have the abilities to ECL out and have ambush anyways. But Hotshot Blaster, this works especially well on these high toughness, low powered units. Something like a Boba Fett, leader, or units. Something like a Super Laser Technician. You can actually use this to smuggle out and actually trade with something. A boss can even be pretty nice, or just a way to end the game and get some extra value from your resource pile. I'm not 100% convinced on Hotshot Blaster in this deck. Normally, when you see this style of card, it's going to be something that really works in a deck that wants Surprise Strike, as it kind of acts as a Surprise Strike, but from your resource pile, which is really nice. This deck doesn't really want to be playing Surprise Strike all that much. A lot of your units are going to be trading off immediately with your ambush, or, naturally kind of die really quickly. And Hotshot Blaster can't even be played on things like V-Wing or 7th Fleet Defender, which are low power units that aren't really, necessarily that amazing. It's just that they're used to kind of stabilize the board, especially V-Wing, and you can't even necessarily use Hotshot Blaster. So I'm curious to see how that performed. But overall, pretty crazy list. There's some sideboard tech here. We have Waylays, No Good to Me Dead in the sideboard. We have a Fel the Dragon, all of which are kind of like, okay, not super surprising. The tech comes in the other 2 slots. We have 2 copies of Palpatine's Return. This is really nice, especially if you do happen to get your Darth Vader's or Maul's discarded early on, as you can get a resource discount. But it's also just nice after the fact to kind of rebuy Maul's, rebuy Darth Vader's from your discard pile, and then follow up with additional plays afterwards. It's just a way to kind of get extra copies of Darth Vader and Maul. But here's where it comes really interesting, and that is the full 3 of Choose Sides. Now, this is a card that I have not been impressed with at all. And it's a card I've barely played with because I've just been super unimpressed with it. This is where things like Bazina Tal already getting the value when she comes down, things like maybe even Salacious Crumb, or having V-Wings come down, get your value immediately, and then you get to swap them with an opponent's units. If you do have like a V-Wing and you play a 2 resource V-Wing, you get to draw a card. You get a 1/1 out of the deal. Then you choose sides. You exchange your V-Wing for, whatever non-leader unit your opponent has. At that point, it's most likely going to be a 6 resource play or 7 resource play. That is a massive value swing, and it is absolutely worth it. And that's where Choose Sides is actually strong. Your opponent plays a Reinforcement Walker. You swap your V-Wing for the Reinforcement Walker, and that is an amazing use of your 7 resources, right? Swapping a Bazina Tal for Reinforcement Walker, swapping a Bazina Tal for like a Maul, all of which can be solid plays. I'm curious to know where the sideboard strategy came in and what matchups he's found Choose Sides to be particularly important, but what an interesting addition to the deck. But I talked a lot about Bobo Green. I wanted to talk a lot about it because it's the finals and the winner of the whole tournament, and it performed really well. And it's a little bit different from the Bobo Greens that we're used to. But Bobo Green is not surprising to see in a top 8, and in fact, not surprising to see taking down a whole tournament. We've seen Bobo Green pop up in the top 8 occasionally over the course of set 2. We got to talk about some of the other lists here. In the top 8, we have Emperor Palpatine Blue. Again, most people are playing double green Palpatine, but Palpatine Blue, very much a sort of soft control, hard control type variant. I would lean to say that it's more of this soft control variant because it's kind of trying to ramp a little bit with resupply, Super Laser Technicians, and just leverage sort of your early official into Royal Guard plan. Now, I'm interested to see that they only have the 2 copies of Yularen. They split between 2 scanning officers, 2 Yularens. I almost always play the full 3 of Yularen to kind of turn on your Royal Guard. This curve of having Emperor Palpatine and official on turn 1 into Royal Guard on turn 2 is really tough for aggro decks to beat. If you're playing Sabine Green, if you're playing Boba Yellow, if you're playing all these different things, it's really tough to get through a very early Sentinel. And that's exactly what Emperor Palpatine's really good at, getting those early officials down. And Royal Guard, you're used to seeing things like Phase 3 Dark Trooper, Cell Block Guard from previous sets, those types of cards being your Sentinel, and you're trading 1 for 1. Not a big deal. Royal Guard almost always trades at least 2 attacks for Royal Guard, and most oftentimes a unit plus some damage on your unit for Royal Guard. If you think about what the natural curve of things is, you have usually a 3 powered attacker on turn 1 into a 3 to 4 powered attacker on turn 2 that you're playing. Royal Guard needs to get attacked twice in order for those units to get through the Royal Guard. And that is really tough to be doing and really tough to get through something like that so early on in the game. Outside of that, I mean, we have very standard stuff that we would expect from Palpatine Blue. We have a really nice kind of early start to the game. Super Laser Technicians resupply ramping into the later stages of the game, and just a lot of different removal. I like the 3 copies of Takedown. If you're going to go way lower on early plays, Takedown kind of fills in that 4-drop slot for you. We have the full 3 of Vigilance, nice way to heal back up. Same thing with the Reinforcement Walker. And again, Darth Vader, we really want to be playing a lot of Imperial units in order for us to hit something off of Darth Vader. I'm kind of curious to note why the lots of 2 copies of cards, but you can't hit the Black Sun Starfighter, which is a Sentinel. You can go ahead and hit Emperor's Royal Guard, which oftentimes will be a Sentinel at this stage in the game, especially if you have Emperor Palpatine down. You can be hitting the Super Laser Technician, Inferno Force, Salacious Crumb, etc. Reinforcement Walker, Snoke, Avenger, these are kind of your game closers, and you're backed up by just a ton of removal. Traitorous also in the main board. This has been really nice, especially against certain matchups, Tarkin Yellow especially, so I do like the Traitorous here main board. I do think the sideboard ends up getting a little bit interesting. They have the full 3 of Relentless in the sideboard, mainly for any deck that's also trying to do a similar strategy where they're leveraging events. Dropping down a Relentless can really mess up your opponent, and that's oftentimes why you have Fell the Dragons and Rivals Fall in there. Not necessarily for the soft control matchup, but these matchups that are going to go longer, right? And then Restock's also in there for those more meal-oriented matchups where you're trying to fight against Vigilance, and then the 3 copies of Devotion to put on an Inferno 4 early on in the game and hopefully heal up a bunch. It's usually where the best place to put Devotion is something on an early space unit so that it can potentially restore you like 6 to 8 HP in a single game. Next one, we got ourselves a Bubble Yellow. So we have multiple Bubble Yellows in the top 8. There's not really a whole lot to talk about in terms of Bubble Yellow here for this top 8, as it's pretty standard stuff. Like every single thing here that you're seeing is pretty standard. The most, I guess you could say, surprising part of this list is Lurking TIE Phantom in the sideboard. Not that that's surprising necessarily, it's just that that is a choice that you have to make. I personally steer towards at least 1 to 2 copies of TIE Phantom in the main deck, as these are cards that can be really amazing, like game winning in certain scenarios. And then if you don't need it, you can always resource it, and it's oftentimes just good, right? 4-powered attacker. Sometimes we'll just trade off with your opponent's early plays, and that's okay, but you don't need to play the full 3 of main deck. I do steer towards 1 to 2 copies in the main deck, though. Outside of that, we have a very standard curve, lots of 2 resource plays, right? Make sure you get down on the board early. That's something that I see a lot of people not doing with Boba Fett. So we have a total of, 11 turn 1 plays, which is really important. You really need to make sure you get on the board early. Now, I personally play Fugitive Wookiee over Viper Probe Droid. I think that because you're playing Boba Yellow, people are incentivized to trade with you early. So I like Fugitive Wookiee. I found it to be pretty nice as long as you're getting down early. But the Viper Probe Droid can also be exceptional. I also really do like Mercenary Gunship. I think a lot of people just see this and like, oh, well, your opponent could steal it. And almost never gets stolen. It's almost always trading off with something early, or your opponent has to kill it. Otherwise, they're just going to take, 9 points of damage from this thing throughout the game, which is really obnoxious. They have the Toro Calican plus Bounty Hunter package up on the curve. This is definitely something that some people opt out of for Boba Yellow. Toro Calican really wants, the Boba Fett, Forlom, Zuckuss kind of bounty hunters to really pop off, and they do have that. And outside of that, you got your Cuttings, you got your No Good to Be Deads, you got your Waylays, you got your Hot Shot Blaster, you got your Boba Fett's armor, all of which are pretty standard stuff. I'll say one copy of or one card that I do like also in the main deck, and I honestly, in some cases, have gone up to 2, is Relentless Pursuit. I've been really impressed with this card, but you do want to have bounty hunters with this card if you're going to go this direction. So having, your Boba Fett's, Forloms, Toros, those are really important cards to run Relentless Pursuit. So I do like that. Another thing to note, which someone might be surprised about, is having Bodhi in the sideboard. Some people have been leaning towards Bodhi in the sideboard more often than not because it's kind of a weak statted unit on turn 2, and it's only really good if you're fighting those decks that are really trying to leverage a bunch of events. In the soft control matchups, it's amazing. It's a threat that your opponent has to deal with while also being something that gets rid of one of their cards in hand. Next one up, we got another Emperor Palpatine, double green Palpatine this time. And once again, we're seeing a card that I personally have not been really impressed with, and that is Cobb Vanth in the list. But a pretty standard double green Palpatine list. This is something that I have personally played a ton of and really isn't different than what we would have expected from double green Palpatine. We have the full, 7 officials on turn 1 with the triple Yularen, double scanning officer, double Piet into Royal Guard. Again, very standard, very excellent curve. We also have 3 copies of Phase 3 Dark Trooper and the full 3 copies of Black Sun Starfighter. Basically, we have 9 Sentinels that we could draw for turn 2, which helps us get to the later stages of the game. We have the Cobb Vanth, which can help grab a bunch of these 2 resource plays, which is really nice. Also, they're even playing Mercenary Gunship. Again, yes, your opponent can steal it, but it's just a way that any deck can get an early aggressive flyer that will trade with basically any other flyer in the early stages of the game. The way that we are winning is, of course, ramping using command, resupplies, Super Laser Technician, only 1 resupply main deck. And I think this is kind of an interesting little adaptation that our friend here has gone with, because resupply is so weak in certain matchups, especially the more aggressive matchups, that you're forced to sort of play one of your Sentinels early on. So having this resupply is really awkward on the curve. You really want to go turn 1 official, turn 2 Sentinel, turn 3 command. That's like what you really want to be doing. And then you're going to want to be killing some unit while also ramping, or putting experience on your Sentinel while also ramping. That's where your real powerhouse comes in. And unfortunately, resupply is just a little bit awkward on the curve. So I totally understand why they are kind of trimming on that one. Card that you might be surprised to see is Bounty Hunter's Quarry. I've been really impressed with Bounty Hunter's Quarry. Any way that you can get kind of a resource discount on a lot of your early drops, especially in a deck that's playing, well, let's see, 3, 6, 9, 12, 14 different 3 resource plays. You're able to basically guarantee yourself hitting a 3 resource play off to Bounty Hunter's Quarry is exceptionally powerful. I really like Bounty Hunter's Quarry, and I also have been trying to slam it in basically all my command decks that are looking to trade off with units in the early game. This is just a really solid card. The way we're running the game, again, ramping into big stuff, Darth Vader's, Reinforcement Walkers, the full 3 ofs in both of those. We also have a Relentless and Devastator main board. In this sideboard, we've got some more big stuff. We do have a copy of Change of Heart, which is kind of interesting. I do like this tech. It's really nice when you get to go out and steal things like a Reinforcement Walker, like a Maul, like something that has an attack trigger, be able to attack with it, and then sacrifice it with Emperor Palpatine can be really nice. That is really strong. You could even kill one of your opponent's units, then sacrifice it, or just trade off with it. More copies of early drops, Mercenary Gunship, Gamorrean Retainer, really good against, of course, Sabine Wren, and any units that's playing space units. Trading off early. Gamorrean Retainer also is a Sentinel on turn 1 when you get another green unit. 2 copies of Legal Authority. This is really nice. Again, when you put it on a Sentinel, you're able to capture something, and then you just have a really big butt Sentinel. That's super obnoxious. Super obnoxious. And all you're trying to do is stall. Again, once you get your Darth Vader down, you can really stabilize the board because you're almost guaranteed to grab a Sentinel here in this deck. Phase 3 Dark Trooper, Royal Guard, both of which are going to be Sentinels, so that can help stabilize the board. And we also have another Timely Intervention, which I do like, especially with Reinforcement Walker. If you're going to play the full 3 of Reinforcement Walker, Timely Reinforcement is one of the ways that you can really kind of steal a game where you otherwise would not have been able to win. Next one up, we have another Boba Yellow list. And again, not much to talk about here. There's a couple of differences that we got to talk about, though. The first one is going to be, we have the full Bounty Hunter package. We have the full 3 of Tauros, the full 3 of 4-LOMs and Zuckuss. I guess we have one less Boba Fett. But we have the full 4-LOM Zuckuss Bounty Hunter package. And this is pretty important. If you're going to run 4-LOM and you want to go ahead and get the Bounty Hunter synergies going, getting the full 3 of Zuckuss is nice as well. It's a little bit tricky because Zuckuss is only exceptional when you have the 4-LOM out first. It is a nice high-powered, high-toughness unit. It's very similar to Poe Dameron, where it's got like just this absurd stat line. But the scary part is when 4-LOM comes down and you can curve into Zuckuss. Most often, I'm finding myself playing Cantina Bouncer because it's a guaranteed way to remove something and leverage additional resources when Boba Fett comes down. We have the main deck Lurking TIE Phantoms, which I do like. I almost always run the 1 to 2 of Lurking TIE Phantoms main deck, as I mentioned earlier. We also have no Bodies in the main board, which is a little bit surprising, especially when your opponent or when you're playing a new adventure. This is another little difference between the two. A new adventure works well with Bodhi, as it's a 2 resource kind of discard a non unit hand card from your opponent's hand, which is kind of interesting. But It does make sense. Again, Bodhi is only exceptional in the soft control matchups where your opponent's playing a lot of events. It's also good in the Bobo Yellow matchup where you can take your opponent's cunnings and things like that. But realistically, this is a very similar list. The, again, big differences are Lurking TIE Phantom's main, A New Adventure, and the full Bounty Hunter package. A New Adventure is, honestly, in my opinion, a little bit of a win more card in most matchups. It's trying to essentially play like a 2-resource waylay by resetting a Cantina Bouncer or resetting a Fett's Fire Spray to attack for 5. These are things that most often aren't going to be the game differential. Now, in some matchups, it can be amazing. If your opponent's playing Frozen and Carbonite, if your opponent's playing Entrenched, if your opponent's playing Emperor Palpatine, you can reset it to not have those things on it. Those are where I like A New Adventure. So I oftentimes relegate to them to the sideboard, but you know, can still do some good work with Fett's Fire Spray, 4-Lom getting to ambush again, maybe Zuckuss getting to ambush again, Cantina Bouncer getting to bounce something again, all of which can be pretty strong. Heck, A New Adventure, 4-Lom ambushing, it enters play again. You can ready it up again with Toro Calican, or ready Toro up again. That can be pretty sweet as well. Next one up, we got Han Blue, new Han Blue. This one is going to be a pretty standard new Han Blue list. And again, there's not a whole lot to talk about here because it is pretty much stock standard. You've got the early plays in Sabine Wren, A-Wing, going into your 3 drops with Cassian Yodas. We have our 4 drops in K2 Kanans that you're playing on turn 2. You have our 5 drop in Poe. I will say one thing that's missing from this list that a lot of other lists are playing is actually leaning towards Rey over Poe. I actually do like Poe still in this list. I play a mix of them, but we're really heavily leaning on a lot of our more expensive plays. The Obi-Wans, Luke's, Mace Windu's, Chewbacca's, Redemptions, Crate Dragons, all of which are pretty standard. Instead of running like Poes and Reys and things like that, we have a couple more early plays. Some decks don't play the A-Wings and Sabines, just Sabines or just A-Wings, and they oftentimes don't play R2-D2, which is a nice way to kind of get a free play, right? Playing a 1-2 R2 alongside a Sabine Wren can be nice, and it sets up your draws. Or just playing an R2 on turn 1 can be nice as well. This one leans a little bit more into the removal aspect. We have 1 copy of Entrenched, some Karabast alongside Open Fire, Takedowns, Fellow Dragon, and Rivals Fall, all in the main deck. So a little bit more heavy on the removal side of things instead of just playing some solid units. And it does make sense because, again, the units that you really want to be getting down, Obi-Wan, really nice because you can flip Han Solo and get those experience on Han, which is nice. Luke comes down, kills something. Mace Windu comes down and kills something. Chewbacca comes down and kills something. Redemption comes down and heals you and is a Sentinel. And then Crate Dragon finishes off the game. All of your expensive stuff usually comes down and does something immediately, whereas your early plays don't necessarily do so. So pretty important to kind of guarantee your opponent's board cleared off with Han. This one, again, pretty stock standard. In the sideboard, we have some more removal, which is pretty standard. Open Fires, Fell the Dragons, Rivals Fall. We have 1 copy of Concord Dawn Interceptors, which is a little bit interesting, a little bit more Sentinel in space for that to be relevant. Disabling Fang Fighters to help get rid of some upgrades. Mystic Reflection is a way to give -2/-2 something if you control a Force unit. Mind you, we do have Yodas, Kanans, Obi-Wans, Luke's, Mace Windu's, all of which are Force units. I'm not a huge fan of Mystic Reflection. I found this card to be a little bit too situational and a little bit too, let's just say, requiring too much setup to be solid. Not only do you need a Force unit, but you also need something that's actually going to get affected by Mystic Reflection. It's just not been that great to me, but it can be good in some situations when you have Kanan, and maybe just shrinking down something is good enough to keep Kanan alive or not taking too much damage, for example, or even Yoda. Forced Surrender. This is a card that not often is going to be played, but in the games where you get a Forced Surrender in and you're able to draw 2 and make your opponent discard 2, for example, a matchup where this is really, really good in is the more mid-rangey ramp matchups where you're playing all your stuff, your opponent's playing all your stuff, you're trading 1 for 1 because you got big stuff, they got big stuff. You play a Forced Surrender, you refill your hand, you remove your opponent's entire hand. Yes, they get a little bit ahead on board, but then you can kind of come back with Crate Dragons, Fell the Dragons, etc. That's where Forced Surrender really comes in handy. Next one up, and this one's the surprising one, Rey Yellow. I know, guys, Rey Yellow, what? That's right, we have Rey Yellow here to talk about. This one is a crazy list. It's a little bit of a tempo list, It's hard for me to kind of explicitly say it's a tempo list, but we kind of have like a rebel aggro core. There is Restored Arc 170, by the way, in this list, 2 copies of it, but for some reason it didn't pop up when we pulled up the image. But you're trying to play a lot of these early plays backed up by some powerful events and some powerful rebel synergies, right? We have the C3PO R2D2 combo, which I personally, one of the first things that I fell in love with the game for when I first played the Luke starter deck back at TwitchCon before the game was even released. That was one of the first things that I was like, dang, this is really cool. I don't think it's particularly strong, but it is really cool. Now in this deck, it's really awesome to have this combo, and if you're able to set it up, or even just play C3PO and name like 3 basically every single time, because you have a lot of 3 resource plays in the deck, or 1 resource plays, right? Is really nice. But the idea here is to draw some extra cards and then leverage your events that you're going to be playing a ton of. We have other things outside of that in Chopper, which is a little bit strange as well. We have a lot of Spectre units, or I shouldn't say a lot, but we have 2 Spectre units in the deck in Ezra Bridger and Kanan to set up our Chopper to have raid 1. And that could be really nice. We're trying to get some early units down. And remember, Chopper can get experience from Rey, which makes him a lot more valuable. Same with R2, right? Chopper becomes a 2-4, R2 becomes a 2-5, both really quite strong. Cordial Turncoat becomes a 3-4, really excellent in this deck. C3PO can become a 2-5 very easily. L3 becomes a 3-3 shielded, all of which are very strong. And most of these are Rebel units, so that you can follow up with Fleet Lieutenant, Wing Leader to get more power pumped into them and just become an absolute menace. Because we have a decent amount of 2 resource plays and 1 resource plays, we have the Mandalorian, the full 3 of main deck over Obi-Wan, which is very surprising, but it does make sense because with the Mandalorian and with Rey, you can actually have a unit survive to the point where you can benefit from the Mandalorian. Now, one of the reasons why the Mandalorian ends up being so weak in most decks is because when you're trying to kind of get the Mandalorian down, you're really wanting to get the effect. You don't just want a 5/6 Sentinel. You want to be able to get the 2 shield tokens to a 2 cost or less unit. In this deck, you're going to be pumping up your 1-drops with experience tokens. It's very likely for you to have a 3/6 R2 by the time the Mandalorian comes down, and you get to full heal R2 and give 2 shield tokens to it, which actually can be very good. If you're getting that effect, Mandalorian is actually not bad, but there's very few decks that can actually guarantee that, and Rey is one of them. However, the Mandalorian still does, in some cases, have less effectiveness, because if you don't have that 1 to 2 resource play, then Obi-Wan is almost always better. Wing Leader, Fleet Lieutenant, that Rebel synergy I do like in this deck, though, because you're putting so many experience tokens on these units that Wing Leader kind of just reinforces that strategy, and actually Wing Leader becomes a viable thing that can trade with stuff because of Rey. Outside of that, we have a lot of expensive stuff in Obi-Wan, Luke's, Han Solo unit to kind of close out the game at the top end of the curve. Luke and Han, both of which are trying to kind of come down, immediately affect the board, and then leave behind this really obnoxious board controller. Outside of that, just some removal in Waylays, Takedowns, Fellow Dragons. Jetpack is a really nice one as well. It kind of makes a lot of your low-powered, high-toughness units really obnoxious because it gives +2/+0 and a shield token. So what you do is you play R2 turn 1, give it an experience token, it's a 2/5. Your opponent plays like a Battlefield Marine, or maybe they play like a 4 toughness unit on turn 2, like a or maybe like a 5 toughness unit on turn 2. You give R2 another experience token, it becomes a 3/6. You give it a jetpack, now he's a 5/6 shielded. You kill their unit, and suddenly you're left with a 5/6 on the board. That's really obnoxious to deal with, so I do like the jetpacks. We also have main deck Confiscate, which also makes sense, especially when you're in the realm of playing Rey and you're trying to go all in on your early drops, getting rid of Entrenched, Frozen and Carbonites, and more importantly, Traitorous, which is pretty common in the meta. Really important to have Confiscate main deck. In the sideboard, we got Village Protectors. I've been really impressed with Village Protectors as of late. If you're against the aggro matchups, Village Protectors can come down and be just so obnoxious. Concord Dawn Interceptors, again, another one that makes sense. The full 3 of both these to kind of get Sentinels down early and protect your early drops and just protect your life total. Rivals Fall, for anyone that's going all in on some units, maybe doing the same strategy that we are, or just having an important leader to take down. And Redemptions to help us heal up in the late game and give us another powerful threat. pretty impressive stuff with Ray Yellow here. But we have one last one to talk about, and that is a Sabine Green list in the top 8. Now, this one, again, very standard stuff. Sabine Green with ECL. Basically the exact same list that you would expect to see, with one major difference. First off, though, I do want to mention some of the kind of differences in terms of events / upgrades being played. I have gone way down on Heroic Resolve here. I personally have found this card to be very, very niche, and I much prefer to have Time Intervention in the deck. The one problem with that is that it does make For Cause a little bit worse, not that much worse, because you're only going to go up for like 1 or 2 copies. But there are some situations where getting that 4th point of damage is really, really important. For Heroic Resolve, I've known this to be a little bit more of a sideboard option for me. The one major difference in this deck comes down to General Dodonna. And General Dodonna being the deck means that we're playing X-Wings because we want more Rebel units. Every single thing in the deck is a Rebel in terms of units, except for Wrecker. And instead of Poe, we're playing General Dodonna. This, to me, is extremely surprising. There are situations where this can be really good, where, you know, you flip Sabine Wren and you get your General Dodonna down, you maybe have another unit, and your units are suddenly outsizing your opponent's unit. They can't deal with General Dodonna immediately, and suddenly you get a pump to everything. You maybe can kill something, keep something around with General Dodonna, and you get an extra damage in with Sabine. It can be really good in some scenarios. For me, this is a card that you have to be in the right place and right time for it to work. I would 100% be playing Poe over this in every single scenario. I would not be playing General Dodonna. We have Energy Conversion Lab. Taking out Poe and putting in General Dodonna makes Energy Conversion Lab a good chunk weaker, because there are a lot of situations where you're playing General Dodonna or Poe with ECL and taking out your opponent's things like Boba Fett, Leader, for example, when it comes down, or defeating a Boba Fett's armor, which can absolutely take over the game, or any other upgrade for that matter. Traitorous, Entrenched, Frozen and Carbonite, these types of things. All the upgrades that your opponents are playing. Jedi Lightsaber can really do some major work, or just hitting your opponent's space for 2 and knocking out something with Energy Conversion Lab is extremely relevant as well. Having General Dodonna here, again, just makes that so much weaker, and I've been very impressed with General Dodonna in lists that aren't able to attack with multiple units. So Leia makes a lot of sense because you're able to attack with multiple units, but the way this is played is as your 5-drop, because you'll notice that they're playing the full 3 of Rebel Assault. So the idea behind what this player is thinking, and I see the logic, I've tested General Dodonna before with Sabine, and I've just been way more consistent with Poe Dameron in the deck. But the idea behind this is you go turn 1, play your 2-drop, turn 2, play your 3-drop, turn 3, play your 4-drop in K2, flip Sabine, attack. You might have like 2 units left behind. Your opponent has a unit left behind. Maybe they don't. Maybe they traded off everything. You got like 1 or 2 units left behind. Turn 4, you play General Dodonna and you Rebel Assault. That's kind of how I'm seeing this shape up as a 5 resource play. You're trying to get General Dodonna down. Maybe you get it down as your 4 resource play. Heck, when Sabine flips, and you try to Rebel Assault the following turn to guarantee your attacks in, because you really want to be attacking with multiple different things with General Dodonna in order for this unit to work. The reason why K2 is so strong despite having a 4/4 stat line is because of Overwhelm and the When Defeated trigger. It makes it a really powerful ECL target to guarantee damage into your opponent's base. Same thing goes with Wrecker. And you get an on defeat trigger, which guarantees 3 additional damage. That's super, super powerful. General Dodonna doesn't guarantee you 3 damage, unless you're able to take initiative and immediately attack with multiple things. And that's where Rebel Assault comes in. So if you're playing General Dodonna, it makes complete sense to play the full 3 of Rebel Assaults, because you're going all in on Rebels. And of course, you need to go all in on Rebels to make sure that General Dodonna is at least giving that +1/+1 to your other friendly Rebel units. And at least Sabine Wren herself is a Rebel unit, so that when General Dodonna comes down, if he does come down on turn 3, you at least get that +1 power for Sabine Wren, which can be pretty massive as well. In the sideboard, nothing too crazy. Pretty standard sideboard. You got Daring Raids for some matchups that, you know, you can easily kill something off, or just, you know, get a little bit extra reach in. Disabling Fang Fighter is really nice for any decks that's running upgrades. Sandari Peacekeeper, really good in the mirror. Getting some Restore in can really help you. Bright Hope, again, nice one for the mirror. And U-Wing Reinforcements, really nice for when any deck's trying to go a little bit more mid-rangey. And in this deck, because you have General Dodonna, U-Wing Reinforcements is a little bit better. since General Dodonna pumps up all the units that you get from U-Wing reinforcements. You can grab General Dodonna, Sabine Wren, and a Spec Force soldier, which is actually quite strong. Heck, you can even grab like Sabine Wren, Battlefield Marine, and a 3-drop, and then have General Dodonna played afterwards and pump all of them. It can be really, really quite powerful. So that's going to be the top 8 lists, guys, and that's going to be the breakdown of the UK tournament over the weekend. Pretty exciting stuff. I will say it was exciting to see a Boba Green list without ECO, and heck, the other day, or last night, actually, not even the other day, I was playing some matches and I saw a couple of people playing Boba Green without ECL, and I was like, this is a little bit surprising. And while I was doing my research that night, I was like, oh, this makes a lot of sense because someone was playing it and won the whole tournament. I'm not convinced that ECL or not running ECL is overall going to give you an advantage. If I were to play 100 games, I would imagine I'd get a little bit better win rate out of ECL than I would without. But this opponent or this player took down a whole tournament without losing a single game. So there's obviously some reason as to why. And it makes sense again in this list because you're not running a bunch of units that don't have ambush and your early drops aren't really that great with ECL anyway. So you may as well just get that 5 extra HP. Emperor Palpatine Blue coming in, Boba Yellow's pretty standard stuff. Palpatine Green coming in, again, a pretty stock list. Another Boba Yellow, Han Blue, pretty standard stuff. Rey Yellow, that was the exciting one for this tournament, alongside the winner. So I'm going to have to jump in and play some Rey Yellow myself. I know that there's a lot of these decks out there, like you'll see maybe in another video in the future, Garsex and Yellow for me. But there's a lot of these like random leaders that when you start to look in at some of our units that we're used to using, and you start to synergize with some of the set 2 leaders, it's a little bit surprising how well they can perform. I think this Rey Yellow list is one of those leaders, because when you see like Cartel Turncoat, you're like, dang, this is a 2-3 in space. That's already pretty good for 1 resource. With Rey, it becomes a 3-4 in space on turn 1, which is really, really strong. Same thing goes with Chopper. A 2-4 is a nice stat line, especially when you can give it raid 1 potentially. Even if you can't, 2-4 is good. Like that's a solid stat line. So I'm pretty impressed with this, and I'm excited to try and build around some of these lists here in the future. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll leave a link to this whole breakdown if you want to check it out yourself in the description down below, and I'll see you all for the next one.